wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Erin, and welcome back to everyone. I'd like to draw your attention to our distinguished panel, who is going to address the topic of the Africa case study and how it relates to digital inclusion, resourcing for sustainability, and many of the challenges and key considerations that need to be taken on board in a project where digital inclusivity is central as a priority. We have with us here today, thank you very much, Ian McFadyen, who's the CEO of Mwabu, one of the N50 partners for, I believe, the very first project that was launched by N50. Ian, welcome to the panel today. We also have Prakash, who comes to us in his role as founder and CEO of picoNETS, who brought to the very same project in Africa their innovations and enabling low-cost access to the types of services that would bring meaning to the term digital inclusivity. And further, we have here today with us James Phiri. He is the president and CEO at Virtual Doctors, another of the N50 partners, who has joined in on this particular project, which we're going to take a closer look at to understand what some of the challenges were that you all have encountered and addressed, what further challenges remain to be addressed, and where digital inclusion fits in this project, and how resourcing, what considerations have to be taken on board in terms of resourcing to make a project successful. Before we get started here, I think Angie has or is about to post a link in the chat bar to a white paper that has been published and circulated broadly about this project, how these partners and others who are working alongside them have begun and continue the work to demonstrate what digital inclusivity can look like at the edge in the African context, and what that may have to say about similar approaches taken elsewhere around the world. So with that, let me just say by way of introduction about the project. The project was brought to N50 by one of the founding partners, Intel, and basically they wanted to prove that state-of-the-art technology with a sensible design could be implemented sustainably and taken to scale in the most remote, low-income environment in Africa. So they went and found the most remote village with very low income that they could find in rural Zambia. The name of that village is Luumbo, and there was a conversation that was initiated with local community to ask them, much like the previous session where we were hearing from representatives of the tribal community in North America, what do you need? And can we wrap a digital solution around that need to bring digital inclusivity to your community? So the first point of discussion that was brought to the partners was, we need education. And so I'd like to, if we may, start with you, James. If you could just say a quick word about, education first. Ian, if you could please provide a quick overview of Mwabu, how they came to the specialization in education, and just a quick word about where you're at in the delivery of education in the village of Luumbo.
Thanks very much, David. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are. I appreciate being given the opportunity to participate in this. I'm actually not too far from Luumbo at the moment. I'm in the Zambezi Valley, about 2 hours drive away from Luumbo. I don't know if everyone else can see a mirror image of my background. If that's the case, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be a tech company, but there you go.
So Ian, it's right way around.
It is. Okay, so it's just me looking wrong then. Cool. So yeah, education is a passion of mine. I was raised in Zambia, and I long time ago realized that if we want to help the conservation education, sorry, the conservation of the environment in this part of the world, then actually the best way to do that is through improved education. But education in rural Africa is incredibly challenging. There are so many factors, as I'm sure most of you are aware. Affordability, lack of connectivity, lack of power, lack of motivated teachers, huge class sizes, lack of hardware. There are a great many issues. So Luumbo fits beautifully into that pilot project where we try and fix some of these problems. So I was very privileged to be invited through Mwabu to come and participate in this particular project. What Mwabu does, we have digitized the Zambian primary school curriculum. It's all grades 1 to 7, 8 local languages, and we cover pretty much all the curriculum elements within, as specified by the Ministry of Education here. So the challenge with Luumbo is that the primary school has no power, it has no connectivity until we arrived, and the teachers themselves often don't have access to textbooks. The class sizes are very large, the conditions are very challenging. I was walking around today and it was 38 degrees centigrade, which is, I guess, something over 100 probably in Fahrenheit. So that's the background to this project. And we relatively recently installed digital tablets and the content into the classrooms, and we handed out, well, we didn't hand out, we allocated smartphones to teachers, and we're now working with them so that they can present the curriculum from their smartphone via projectors to the classes. And we're finding that is helping them improve the quality of education. But we don't have any quantitative data that we can actually present at this stage. It's far too early. So David, I don't know if you want me to go on any more about the background to the project, but hopefully that suffices.
That's a great start, Ian. Many thanks for the introduction, and we have several hundred follow-up questions for you momentarily. Before we get there, though, I would like to turn now to you, James, and if you could give us an introduction to virtual doctors and how they came to the project, and maybe just a quick word about where you've gotten to with the project. James.
Okay. Thank you, David, and hello, everyone. The Virtual Doctors is essentially a telemedicine charity that links doctors to clinical officers in rural clinics to help them diagnose patients. So if a clinical officer is presented with a patient and they have not come across that particular case or those particular symptoms, what they can then do is use our Virtual Doctors app to send a case, select one of 23 specialties, and that case then goes to a doctor or specialist who may then engage with that clinical officer, ask additional questions and help them to diagnose the patient.
Yeah, okay.
So
when is this ACP call?
I am going to look and I'm going to.
Okay, so apologies, that was something else coming through. So what that enables us to do is to try and achieve 3 things. One is avoiding referrals of patients to distant hospitals, helping that clinical officer to gain additional knowledge so that they can reapply what they've learned to cases in the future, and hopefully to help to reduce mortality rates in rural settings by doing this. So it's really the use of technology in rural health settings and taking advantage of the advancement of telephone networks across, in this case, Zambia, and helping to link what is quite an amazing pool of 240 or so volunteer doctors in the UK to help support these clinical officers in rural health settings. So there is a medical component to that, and there is also an educational component. Our main aim is to make this sustainable and actually have local doctors responding to cases, and we are working with the Ministry of Health to transition into that path, because after all, this is about, local people helping local people, and of course having the support of a wider network, in this case doctors from the UK, and maybe in the future doctors from elsewhere. So our involvement in this project is particularly fascinating because we have been struggling with mobile network technology. Not all clinics have access to broadband, and even when they do, there is also the challenge of how do clinical officers get the funding in order to have the data that they can use in order to access these facilities, and long term, is that sustainable? How can we provide them with more educational, online educational materials to help them with their learning? And this is where the N50 partnerships, the N50 project is particularly vital, because it is all about expanding that accessibility to rural health settings such as the ones we're working in.
And so, if I may, James, just a quick follow-up on that, in terms of trying to get affordability so that you can get to sustainability. Before N50 and this project ever began, your organization was having to innovate to try to push the costs down, right? And to what point had you gotten to in providing the highest level of access possible at the lowest cost? What sorts of trade-offs were you encountering? What sort of innovation were you applying?
So we started initially with desktop computers, then we went into tablets, and now using mobile phones. And the cost has dramatically reduced because we're using mobile phones, and we're looking at what partners can we bring to the table who can help us with the devices. How can we interact with telecom providers such that we can have the best return from the amounts of money we're spending on data? Because you can spend, I don't know, maybe $5 helping a clinical officer to have access to data for a month. But if they don't send any cases during that month because they haven't had complicated cases, for instance, that is money that is lost. So can we get reverse billing from mobile phone operators? Can they give us zero rating as part of their efforts to do their own projects in terms of helping communities? So those are the types of conversations we're having before we got N50. And it's interesting that actually in Malawi, when we're talking to TNM, they were very much looking at, how can they assess what we're doing with our app and give us reverse billing? Because what that means for us, that would be a game changer, because if the data is not used, we don't get charged, and therefore we can support yet another clinic. And those are the types of things we've been looking at. Okay,
this is the perfect segue, James, for the introduction of our next speaker. Prakash, innovation, scale, low-cost digital solutions. Please kick us off with an introduction to picoNETS and yourself.
Thanks, David. This is a great opportunity to present to a panel at N50. So we at picoNETS, we're primarily offering an edge compute and edge CDN capability. And one of the things that we are challenging today, there is a very strong Western view that, internet accessibility means you need to spend billions of dollars in fiber. If you don't have fiber, you can't have internet. And I'm glad that a lot of satellite companies and other innovative companies are actually challenging that by other means of internet access. One of the things that we are pushing for is that today, 80% of the data that is going to the internet can be cached locally, which means it doesn't need to go to the internet at all. And especially if you're in a rural village in Zambia and you have content which is locally created, locally accessed, why does that data need to go to the cloud at all? And that's exactly what is happening today. We were talking to somebody who's doing relief work and they have relief workers, that data is actually getting pushed to stream to YouTube, and then it is getting consumed back in that village. There's no need to make a round trip to some data center which may even be outside your country. When you can run edge compute and edge caching and deliver that content locally within that village, you can save a lot of bandwidth and you can create affordable internet. And like my panelist James mentioned, that what this creates is, for example, in this particular project in Zambia, what's being done is by having partners such as Virtual Doctors and Mwabu, those content are getting delivered from the cache. It's not getting delivered from a satellite. Today, the cost of data is very expensive in Zambia because it is going via satellite. Now, if it doesn't go to the satellite at all, if it gets delivered from the cache right at the cell tower, that means now you can provide affordable internet and data plans to those customers. And those customers who are currently mostly consuming text and voice can now start getting used to consuming data. So it enhances their life, it increases their GDP, and also, they start consuming data, which means, more applications can now come on this platform. And like I said, 80% data can get served. If you see any large global telcos, 80% of the data gets served from the cache. It doesn't go outside the network at all. So why can't that be replicated in smaller locations, right, at a village level or at a district level or at a tower level, and just serve that community? Why do you need to keep going to the internet? Is what we're pushing for.
So Prakash, thank you for that. So from a technical perspective, and bearing in mind that I am not an engineer, from a technical perspective, are there still key challenges that have to be overcome?
So yes and no. So the good part is most of these challenges that we came across is already taken care of. I think now the big thing would be, how can we replicate this across multiple locations? So I think once we start doing that, we may come across newer challenges. But I'm sure the team is technically very strong. The entire N50 project has some great engineers working on this, and they keep solving problems. So we've solved this problem in Luumbo, where we've created a stack where the same hardware runs the RAN, which is the radio stack to run the telco infrastructure, and it runs our caching and other stuff. So it's a very low cost, affordable way to provide mobile connectivity. And now the idea is to just replicate this across other locations as well.
Okay, you mentioned, Prakash, and I don't mean to pick on you, and I'll come, Ian and James, back to you in just a moment. You mentioned cost reduction, and one of the recurring themes for the N50 project is trying to get to that low cost with a low bandwidth delivery, if not, caching. And I realize this may be a little bit difficult to answer, but if you could give us an idea of order of magnitude, what sort of cost reduction is realized through the use of this caching technology in a network?
So the good part is, the order of magnitude could be like 10 to 20 times cheaper, primarily because of the fact that satellite bandwidth is so expensive, right? And caching is really cheap. You could just take commodity hardware, you could take our software, slap it in, and it can be up and running very quickly. So of course, there's some integration required. In this case, we did integration on 4G. In other countries, invested countries like US, we've done integration on 5G. So now we have like a process to do that integration and get that thing kicked off. So in my opinion, you would, because satellite bandwidth is so expensive, this is definitely a significantly lower cost solution. You can definitely scale this much wider, 10x you can scale just because you're saving so much on the satellite bandwidth. And
Okay.
you're also increasing consumption.
Yeah.
Essentially, sorry, David, I just wanted
Yeah.
to finish this thought. But essentially what we are saying that today, if you look at a country where there's a lot of fiber, there is high-speed internet, there's a lot of stuff that you can do because you have that access. But in a country where you don't have that high-speed internet, but you still want to create that high-quality video, HD or 4K video, or even an AR/VR experience with a local cache, you can still do that. It doesn't require a very high-speed internet is what is our promise.
Okay. We're meant to be talking about resources on this session, which is a very broad subject area. I'd like to talk a little bit more about cost and how we get it down and what the implications are for sustainable delivery of education and telehealth. The innovation that you have brought to this project, Prakash, is fantastic. I'm reminded, however, of the one of my father's favorite expressions, which was, for every complex problem, there's a simple solution. And it's wrong. Ian, what are some of the other challenges that you see that have a direct bearing on getting to a sufficiently low cost profile in the project? What's the magic sauce, the recipe, if you will?
Good question. Look, hardware costs are significant in all of this. When we went into Luumbo, we did a baseline survey, and there were very, very few smartphones available within that community. So a couple of thousand people, I think we identified order of magnitude 20 to 30 smartphones, and those were generally held by teachers or the medics, that sort of category of professional person. So most people in certainly rural Zambia just can't afford the phones. And we operate a community hub very close to where I am at the moment, and we sell talk time in that hub. And the average purchase of talk time is 2 kwacha. So that's about 15 US cents at the moment, 20 US cents. That's how much they pay or buy talk time to put onto their phone. So there just isn't the money around in the community to consume a lot of data. So we have to find ways of getting content to them very, very cheaply. And basically, as Prakash said, we need to, on certain elements of content, the MNOs need to be persuaded, if possible, to come to the party and zero rate it and drive the pricing down as much as possible. That's the real challenge that I see in terms of cost. There are multiple other issues in terms of motivation of teachers, of the cultural issues with the families, when it comes to things like education. But driving costs down is probably number one.
So, Ian, this is a rural setting for the project, and it is not unique across Africa nor the rest of the world in that regard. There are other thoughts that come to the fore that have a bearing on cost as well, and that would be things related to infrastructure, not least access to power. How does that fit in the equation?
Yeah, again, very fair point. Look, at Luumbo, there is no power. There is no utility power in that community. So a limited number of people are able to afford solar panels in their houses, but the school has no power. So to make this project reality in Luumbo, the project invested order of magnitude $10,000 US into that school to put solar power into it. And then we back that up with putting microservers into a microserver into the school, so that all the tablets and devices that are in use, the data traffic flows to the microserver, and then we aggregate that ourselves, and then we send it through the picoNETS CDN to get that data back. But yeah, we had to put solar power into the school to make this viable. My gut feel is the way education is going to go in rural Africa is that it's going to be based around smartphones. Teachers will be given smartphones with content and support information on their phones, and then they will project those either through projectors or some kind of TV monitor or screen to the pupils, because the cost of deploying tablets to every pupil is prohibitive. Mwabu developed a sort of rotational model system so that at any one time, if the tablets were in use, 2 children were sharing a tablet, but only 1/3 of the class was using the tablets. Another third was engaging with the teacher, and another third was engaging in sort of peer-to-peer learning. And that system was designed to basically reduce the hardware costs. Because the more devices you put into a school, if it doesn't have power, guess what? You've got to put more solar in as well. So the cost sort of ramps up, not quite exponentially, but very, very significantly. So we've got to find smart ways of delivering educational content to people in these communities. And my gut is it's going to be mobile based with some kind of projector or TV screens in the classrooms.
Okay. And James, is it true that your work for the telehealth layer of services that is being provided through the network, is that going to similarly gravitate increasingly towards the use of smartphones?
Yes, we are already using smartphones because that is the most effective way to do what we're trying to do, or what we're currently doing. And we face exactly the same challenges that Ian was just talking about just now, in that we have these clinics that are scattered, and each of those clinics might need a device, and that device is allocated to a clinical officer. And you get into this, in a situation sometimes where there might be more than one clinical officers, and they have to share the device. So who is responsible for that device? You get people who are trying to do the right thing and being responsible, saying, I'm responsible for this device, so I can't share it with you. So you end up with multiple devices. Now, is that a sustainable model? Probably not, because the cost of these devices are expensive. We've come into issues sometimes where a device has been in the field for 18 months. There's a new software upgrade that comes up, which essentially makes that device redundant because they can't upgrade to the new software, because we didn't purchase a device that had enough capacity in there, for example. So then you have to start replenishing them. Devices get damaged. The other cost, when you're talking about cost, is that because the clinics are scattered, how do you get economies of scale when you're training people across 20 sites? And some of these are very hard to get to, some of these places. Luumbo is quite hard to get to. And hiring a vehicle to get the trainers to these different locations can be quite costly. So how do you do that effectively? And so we've been looking at how we resolve those types of things. For example, by bringing people to the district, but you are then moving people who are employed by the ministry to a central location. You need to pay for that. Then you start to think about considerations around insurance. If they have an accident on the way there, who's responsible for that? So there are all sorts of things that creep in when we're looking at the risks around this, as well as how to mitigate costs. And one of the most important solutions, of course, is that you have to work in partnerships with people, organizations who are on the ground. And that's why we feel it's quite important to be very well coupled with the ministry and work alongside them as partners to their strategy of improving healthcare.
So, James, to what extent could it be said that you have gotten to scale more broadly beyond this single project with delivery of your services for health?
So we are now in 240 clinics currently. We're supporting 240 officers. And we're just in the middle of expanding to another 20 in Zambia. So there'll be 260 sites altogether by the end of this year. And then in neighboring Malawi, we are currently in 6, which were the original pilot sites, and we're looking to expand to another 40 in that country as well. So I suppose Zambia could be regarded as a very large-scale pilot, which has proved that the system works. And in Malawi, we're going to expand to another 40, hopefully this year as well. Okay,
and further out, are there other country targets in the long-term plan?
We have been considering this, but if we consider that we are in 200 and we will be in 260 sites in Zambia by the end of this year, there are over 4,000 clinics in Zambia. So there is quite a lot of scope to expand within Zambia as well as Malawi. But we have been looking at potential partners, and we are currently looking to work with one partner in Kenya. They focus on mobile clinics, and we're looking at how we can collaborate with them. And by collaboration, it removes some of the hurdles that we've encountered, because they already have an MOU in place with the different districts. They already have people on the ground, and this is just us enhancing or adding to what they're already providing. So it makes it an easier transition and helps them to do what they do best with the additional capacity, if you like, from what our volunteer doctors can offer. So I think collaboration is one way of attaining scale and impact without the long runway that we've experienced in trying to establish ourselves in Zambia and Malawi.
Okay. I suppose it should be said at this juncture that the mission of N50 is to leverage partnerships. It's all about collaboration. And one of the things that we hear again and again from those organizations who join N50 is they have come in largely because they have tried to go it alone, and they have seen that partnership is key to getting more quickly to scale. So it's interesting to hear you say that. And one more quick question, and I want to come over to you, Ian, to share your perspective on sort of on the same area of discussion here with James. James, how does what you do get paid for? Where's the resource coming from?
Currently, we've had a lot of trusts and foundations, individuals sponsoring us, because actually, when you look at what we have, it's a very low cost model. The largest costs that we have are the devices, getting a team out to train the clinical officers, and the data, the monthly data that Ian was talking about. It costs us 50 kwacha a month to support one clinical officer. Beyond that, we have this very large pool of volunteer doctors, 240 or so in the UK. And that is really, that amazing pool of people who volunteer their time to support the clinical officers is what makes this thing work. In addition to that, our technology that we're using, the app that we're using at the moment, was developed by a group of people who, again, have been volunteering their time for this service over a period of more than 6 years now. And they developed the software, they've been maintaining it. But if we are to scale and actually introduce some of the other innovations that we want to introduce, such as online learning for clinical officers, then I get very interested in the whole concept of caching data locally, because that for us would enable that to happen without incurring costs that will be, prohibitive.
Interesting. In the health context, when you're caching that type of training content to help drive the sustainability of your enterprise, does that then create a scenario where major organizations from the health sector may become interested in becoming sponsors or in some other way bringing resource into your enterprise?
Yes, I would hope so, because Part and parcel of that learning would be trying to source experts in different subject matters, and we would hope that, you know, in normal circumstances, these people would be linked to larger organizations that are already working in that space. There are lots of companies, for example, the Gates Foundation kicked off a malaria project in Zambia, which they've funded. But that links in with what we're trying to do in terms of, you know, people who are working in that space. There are people working in HIV, there are people working in, I think in Malawi, we were recently part of workshops around long bone fractures. You know, incidences of people being involved in accidents and needing orthopedic expertise is increasing because people have access to cheap motorbikes. In fact, one of our clinical officers was recently injured trying to deliver samples on a motorbike accident. So the access to greater mobility is increasing the need for medical expertise in areas where we don't have lots of orthopedic surgeons. Ophthalmology is another area, for example. So that there are all sorts of areas where we could partner with other organizations that are doing different projects or engaged in different activities, where we would be a small but crucial component in terms of linking expertise to need.
Okay, thank you, James. So Ian, I'm interested in understanding, we've heard just now from James about the extent to which virtual doctors has gotten to scale, and the implications of cost in that. And I wonder, for education, in what Mwabu has been doing, you know, what level of scale have you gotten to, and where do you think that we can get to beyond that, as a function of cost, if not other factors?
We're certainly nowhere near where we would like to be in terms of scale yet, David. We've sold some 40,000 licenses in Zambia over the years. So we've probably reached millions of children, but this business, particularly as we focus on very deprived schools and deprived areas, they've got no money. So there is no money to buy the content, basically. So we have to rely on three revenue streams. One is actually developing bespoke adult education content for all sorts of things: HIV training, awareness, financial literacy. And that's actually a key part of our business to keep us sustainable. The biggest individual buyers of our content and lesson plans are teachers. So we sell into the teaching market, but that's not government, that's at a sort of retail level. And then the rest of our revenues come from a blend of NGOs acquiring tablets and content, and the government. But the Zambian government, as most people are probably aware, in the last few years has been economically in very, very difficult positions. So they've just received a substantial IMF bailout just a matter of weeks ago, which meant the government had no money to deploy digital education into its schools. My view is that there is no other way to deliver education at scale cost effectively other than through long-term digitization of the content and finding ways of getting it deployed into schools. But the government here needs to change the way it thinks. It, for the last 4 or 5 years, has been deploying computers, desktop type computers, into these schools. And they're hugely expensive to deploy. But I've been in schools here in Zambia where they've got the computers, but they don't actually have any power. So, you know, there isn't enough joined up thinking on the whole educational approach here. And I'm doing what I can to try and persuade the government that they need to think very laterally, very differently from traditional mainstream computer labs. Because where they have them, they're not maintained properly. They get all sorts of viruses. There's no software updates. There's all sorts of personal use going on the PCs and things. So, you know, the way to scale this is reduce your hardware costs, and that reduces your power requirements, which makes it more affordable for solar. And it comes back again to mobile phones. Put the content onto mobile phones and let people the teachers have access to that. The other thing that we're trying to do, I've had numerous donors say to me, look, Ian, the cost of the hardware means that it's actually very poor bang for your buck when you're spending money on edtech, particularly in rural schools, because the cost per outcome is significantly higher than some of the much easier things that you can perhaps do. And we've got to address that. And one of the things we're trialing at Luumbo, and we're just starting out now, is actually persuading the schools to release the tablets into the community at night, at weekends, and holidays. Because instead of having the tablet sort of in use 3 hours a day during term time, if it's actually used 6 hours a day all year round, say, then you're tripling the impact of that device in that community. But it's something, there's huge resistance amongst the teachers and the education ministries to do that, because they worried, well, we spent all this money on a tablet, we don't want it broken or stolen or whatever. So we're trying to bring about a mindset change, basically, in finding ways of using hardware much more often and much more to increase the bang for buck. So that's a large part of our drive on the hardware side at the moment, but also just generally making content so that teachers can hold it on their phones. And we're providing things like teacher training videos, and teachers have got them on their phones. That's the sort of stuff we can cache onto the picoNETS CDN very easily. So yeah, we're experimenting with a range of different ways of getting the information into the hands of the users at a very low cost.
Okay, I want to come back to one of the points that you made just now, Ian, and that is the three primary sources of financial resourcing. One, revenue generated by sale of your bespoke educational content. Two, NGOs. Three, government. I'm interested that there's not a 4 there for the private sector. And I'm thinking, as one example, earlier today in the program, we heard on another session about how the extractive sector, oil, gas, mining, cocoa, palm oil, fish, all these sectors have big buyers at the top of the food chain who are now funding programs, projects, and other activities down at the downstream end of the supply chain. And I know Zambia, for example, isn't very strong in mining of copper and other minerals. I'm just throwing that out as an example. Has there been any discussion with those types of entities for them to fulfill perhaps mandates, contractually binding, as I understand it, that they be supporting social programs in some way, and that you would become a beneficiary and get more readily to scale?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're dealing with FQM, one of the big mining companies here, various others. It's interesting, you know, as an edtech business, we haven't been around that long in the scheme of things, and initially we started out by selling our content into organizations, NGOs, and they would take it and use it, but they were often unwilling to pay for all the sort of follow-up teacher training sessions, the M&E type work that we would advocate. So we'd find that we'd be talking to DFID as was, or USAID, and they'd say, prove that it works. And we go, well, actually, we're not closing the data cycle, the circle here, to get the data back to be able to demonstrate to you. Excuse me. So we're very much at the mercy of of our users in terms of giving us information back on the efficacy of the product. So that led to two things. One, we relatively recently have migrated. Bear in mind that I didn't tell you this at the beginning, but Mwabu started out in Zambia back in 2010 when all this content was being built. And actually, as a company, the founder of the business, who sadly passed away in 2015, which is how I came to be where I am. He started building this, and he was very, very enlightened and ahead of his time, actually. So he built all the content in what now is a very old platform at the time where iPads were just starting their life, if you like. So he was well ahead of the game. But none of the content could be used online. So it's only in the last year or two that we've migrated everything onto a much more up-to-date platform and up-to-date software, and we can now access the data and put it out there online. So we're just at an early stage of that journey. And we're very much focusing as a company on saying to our customers, we can see, if you've got connectivity, we can see what is going on in your classrooms in terms of usage of devices or excuse me, or curriculum. And my gut is that's going to be a game changer.
Okay, Prakash, you have been very patiently listening in as we hear from Ian and James. Are there thoughts that have come to mind across this conversation from the perspective of picoNETS on what can enhance, improve digital inclusivity through a project like Luumbo, and more broadly in the scaling out of these types of services?
Yeah, thanks, David. So essentially, see, what is one key component over here is the cost, right? Everything boils down to cost. You may have a great solution, but if it's expensive, it actually doesn't work, or it can't scale very much. The advantage of the solution that we put together with the N50 partners, it primarily does three things. First of all, it reduces the cost of data to extremely low, so the carriers can now offer a zero-rated service for the applications which are already getting served from the tower. That's a very, it's a dramatic change in the way data is getting served. The second thing that is happening over here is we're using commodity hardware. So the moment you separate the hardware and the software and you use standard Intel hardware, which is commoditized, excuse me, scaling becomes that much easier. You're not locked into a vendor who then wants a piece of the pie of every element in the telco infrastructure. The third is, which is again tied to the hardware and software, is the open RAN architecture. So it's an open standard architecture, which means multiple vendors can now compete. And in this case, it's not only open standard, it's open source. So there's no license fee or anything that is being paid to any third party to actually use the software for providing all the telco stack. So this is what has happened. And another important element that we're doing over here is we are running on the same physical hardware. Our caching doesn't require any specialized hardware. It actually runs on the same hardware. We require a little more storage to be able to cache more data, but disk is cheap these days. So that's, so the incremental cost is very little, but the overall cost saving is massive, particularly in the cost of data that is getting saved.
So Prakash, I think both Ian and James referenced the importance of zero rating for the project and for more generally any replication of the model from the Luumbo project to other locations. Do you think that that is achievable? Is there a sufficient level of motivation, you think, with mobile network operators? And if not, then what?
So David, I come from India. In India, actually, zero-rated service is illegal because of net neutrality, right? So there's a pros and cons of the thing, but in India, large telcos are able to cache 80% of the data. So when they give the user, India also has the lowest cost of data in the world. So when they give the user a $2 pricing, for data per day, it primarily covers where they go with an assumption that 80% data will get served from the cache. In case of Zambia, I don't know if we are still there yet, but the moment we start doing that, then there's going to be very little difference between a zero-rated service and a non-zero rated service. Coming back to your question, I think it's up to the telcos to see if there's motivation enough to do this. And I'm not the one who's managing that. I think there are other great partners in the ecosystem who are managing that telco relationship, which is which is an art by itself. But they're actually pitching for these kind of things, and I think the interest level is very high from the carrier side as well. And I think it should go through. I don't think there should be a challenge over there, but I'm not the one who manages that relationship.
So thanks, Prakash. Ian, the mobile network operators, they have universal mandate that came along with the provision of a license. The license that is their lifeblood requires them to do certain things to move towards universal service. They have corporate social responsibility. I don't know if they're mandates, but inclinations. Couldn't zero rating be in part or in whole a fulfillment of those mandates and inclinations?
Yeah, absolutely.
Feel free to jump in here too. Sorry, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll certainly be canvassing the government here to find ways of zero rating educational content, and not just Mwabu, but secondary school content, tertiary content as well, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to help develop the nation much more quickly. So they need to change some things here. But that said, I'm not particularly optimistic. Dealing with the telcos, the MNOs, is extremely time consuming, and as you know from some of the experiences we've had here, it takes forever to change things. So I don't know how quickly that'll happen. It'll be very interesting to see what Starlink does to all of this, I suspect, but that's beyond my pay scale.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Before we do, if the MNOs, and this has global implications, of course, right? The zero rating question, or in some way addressing cost from the MNO, the mobile network operator. If they're unwilling, does it then become a policy issue where there needs to be a directive laid down by the government requiring certain action to be taken? So for example, maybe it would be part of the Universal Service Fund conditions where the mobile network operator who has been given the license has agreed to do so with the condition that they will address X number of new sites in unserved areas and perhaps provide zero rating in those types of rural low-income communities. Is this a policy question?
Look, yes, I think it probably is. But the MNOs are going to not like, I expect, zero rating content. But actually, the picoNETS solution, if deployed at scale across the nation, is perfect for basically providing zero rated content into these communities, because it goes from the cache. It doesn't go through the entire network. It just goes to the local community. And it doesn't actually cost the MNO anything to be doing that. if it is purely cash content. So something like the Mwabu curriculum, for example, that doesn't change day to day. It's there and it's fixed for, you know, until there's a few tweaks needed. So it's very easy to park something like the Mwabu curriculum content onto a cache server. It's very easy to park, as we're doing at Luumbo, the Bible in Tonga on the server, because that doesn't change day to day. So people can all of a sudden start accessing this stuff. At the moment, MTN hasn't zero rated the traffic between someone's individual phone and the cache. And they need to be doing that because it's not costing them anything. And it's not like people would be in Luumbo dialing into the Mwabu service to get our content because they can't afford to do it. So by caching it and then giving it away for free, that's a game changer. We need to be going and talking to the government and trying to persuade them that they should be looking at this as a policy, I think.
Well, you know, Ian, I'm sort of making a mental note of an action item here. One of the founding partners of N50 is the GSM Association, whose members include most of the world's mobile network operators. And they concern themselves heavily with advocating for progressive policy reform. Maybe we should get this on their agenda worldwide. Yeah, not least in Zambia. So we'll keep an eye on that, and I'll come back to you with what the dialogue looks like when we get in touch with GSMA on this. In the meantime, I'm coming back and I'm thinking earlier in this conversation how partnerships were identified as a key in helping to get to lower cost and greater efficiency and scale. I think it was yourself, James, who drew a line under that. And I'm wondering, you know, first of all, let me just say, there are other partners who are involved in the Luumbo project who are not on this session, or they are listed in the white paper, which I would invite everyone to take a look at. It's in the chat bar, or there's a link to it. But these partners include Intel, Dell, MTN is the mobile network operator that we're working with on the project, and GSMA has been involved on this project as well, among others. Gentlemen, I'm wondering, are there other types of partnership for the Luumbo model that would enhance it and enable it in any way to go faster, better, and at lower cost?
I think, if I may jump in, I think when you raised the policy question, that resonated with me because all these mobile phone operators are operating almost independently. So if you go to a certain area and you are with MTN and MTN doesn't have greater connectivity there, you're stuck. You have to switch your SIM card in order to get connectivity. So there is that question. How do we get to a position where actually it doesn't matter which SIM card you have, you should still be able to pick up network connectivity from the nearest tower? That doesn't happen in Zambia at the moment. And I think for me, one of the most crucial partners in this is the government. And by that, I mean government strategy, a strategy that is inclusive and brings people together so they can collaborate. So if we're talking about education, it should be much broader than it is currently. So that you look at what other partners are required in this, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in education, whether it's in connectivity. How do we bring this together so that we have a holistic strategy that encompasses everything that we need to do and to have the greatest impact? Because there are a lot of silos in this space. And whilst, you know, and this is why the N50 project is great, because it is trying to bring that cohesiveness together. But the government can accelerate that. And actually it would be in the interest of governments to look at that, because that would actually accelerate the results they're trying to achieve. So the government is a significant partner. They have all sorts of things on their plate, as Ian was saying. If we look at the Zambian government, there's a lot on their plate in terms of what they're trying to achieve. But by looking at how they can bring partners together to achieve those things, it can actually lessen the load and accelerate the impact. So maybe there is an opportunity to have dialogue at a different level than we individually as a little organization can have, to have that sort of strategic overview and, you know, bring the various organizations together as part of a cohesive strategy.
James, thank you. Ian, is that what I might describe as a knowing smile? These are areas where you have been involved, right, with the government?
Yeah, it's James is absolutely right. We need to be breaking down the silos and getting a sort of work group together that includes the various ministries, education, science and technology, the regulator, the telezictor, but not just those guys, but also some of the community ministries where they're tasked with improving, you know, community knowledge and development as well. So I will be advocating and am advocating at a high level here that we start figuring out how we collaborate across ministries, because historically that hasn't happened very much. A good few years ago, about 4 years ago, we, Mwabu, won a very large contract from an organization called Smart Zambia, which was tasked with delivering tech across all government ministries, including the Ministry of Education. And we won this contract from Smart Zambia to deploy into, I don't know, there was 80,000 computers or devices or something. And our colleagues at the Ministry of Education knew nothing about it. So that's maybe an extreme example, but I know for a fact that there's not enough cross-fertilization and cooperation between the different ministries. And it might be that N50 coming in with your wide experience and sort of independent approach could stimulate enough thought here to cause that sort of task force to be created to smash down the silos. That's what's needed.
So there's our second action item for this session: smashing down silos. So Ian, I'm not making a joke about that. This is something we should be seriously looking at, and let's come back to that after this session. We have run over by all of 3 minutes. We probably could have gone another 3 hours.